So welcome to Transform Gov, where we share real-life stories about how technology and data are changing our public services. And at every episode, we go straight to the people who are making the change, the source, in fact, the leaders and the teams doing the work. Transform Gov, as you know, is part of the Ireland eGovernment Awards, and it's brought to you in partnership with Accenture. Just a quick note before we start, the updates for the Ireland eGovernment Awards and the Leadership Summit, which is the morning of the awards, and on the 24th of September in O'Reilly Hall, UCD. You can find information on our website. So it's digitalgovawards.com. So today we're in part 2 of a fascinating conversation with our new Government CIO, Louise McKeever. And I thought we'd start off with kind of imagining a scenario, because often public services is just seen sometimes as a service, but in fact, it's about people, really, isn't it? And about the way it affects our lives. So I suppose imagine losing someone and, you know, it's a very painful process anyway when you've lost somebody, but then you have to go to one public body after another to update them, probably with much of the same information. And, you know, that can be really difficult. So I know that the government is trying to change that experience, and a big part of that would be Louise's role. But I want to welcome Louise, and then we can kind of get into the nitty-gritties of how we're looking at life events and trying to affect those and change those, so it makes it easier for our citizens. So welcome back to part 2.
Thanks, Maeve.
So when we first spoke preparing for the podcast, you were just 6 weeks into your new role as Government CIO. And I know when we talked, you were already kind of facing a much bigger scale. I mean, it's not that you haven't done big scale projects, but it just is a national project, if you like. And also bigger relationships and larger numbers of people that you're going to affect. So did anything surprise you so far? I mean, how many weeks are you into the role?
So I'll be 2 months next week.
2 months?
Actually.
Okay,
2
only
months.
8 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, very early on. Any surprises then?
Well, I suppose, first of all, like, it's such an exciting role, you know, and the breadth of it. And I have the surprises. When you say surprises, it's just the speed at which everything is moving so fast, you know, and that's really good. Fantastic. That's showing form. But when you're a newbie, and I'm not a newbie, you know, but new in the role, you know, you're kind of going, ooh, and I feel like I've done a lot so far in such a short period of time, and lots to do, you know. But
and on top of that, the EU presidency, so there must be pulling you into other areas that you normally wouldn't have to get involved in, right?
Yeah, and I think that's it. You know, there are some parts of the role that are very similar and, you know, would be very familiar with previous roles, and there's others that are not so familiar. And it is a case of, it's that piece of getting pulled into loads of different forums, and very exciting. You know, but I suppose that's the challenge. The challenge is trying to get your feet under the table, and trying to keep up in probably Ireland's busiest time.
Yeah, there's so much going on out there, just in terms of the world, but also in terms of technology with AI and everything. So it's going to be a bit mad. But in terms of but your role, I mean, I have talked to people. I say, you know, Louise McKeever, she's our new Government CIO. And they don't always know what that really means. And somebody said to me, well, that doesn't mean she's taking care of all the state laptops. I said, no, I don't think that's the role. So give us just a brief of what your role is.
No, yeah. So first of all, and I get that, people do ask me, what does it mean to be the Government CIO? What was different to your previous role? And I suppose the first thing is, it is very different in the scale, and there's similarities. So I suppose our responsibilities, well, as Government CIO, I lead on OGCIO's office as such, which is a division within the Department of Public Expenditure, PAIR, formerly known as Infrastructure, Public Service Reform and Digitalisation. So it is a division. So I have responsibilities running the division within the department to provide services for the department. You mentioned AI there particularly as well. So that's one part, 2 briefs really within the department perspective and leading on the office. And then cross-government, again, working with other departments on various different issues and areas, which I'm sure we'll come to. And then from a national perspective, as strategic advisor to the Minister in relation to all things digital and otherwise. So it's a very broad brief, and then that kind of spans into, obviously, from an EU perspective and a more global perspective as well.
Okay. And I know when I spoke to your predecessor, getting the pillars, I suppose the foundations in place has been a challenge, hasn't it? Because if we're going to move to a far more collaborative government where life events, and I think people hopefully at this stage know what I mean by that. It's like for bereavement, you know, what happens on all the stages between somebody dying and then it being registered across the public sector, etc. Would you think that those pillars are in place, or is there still quite a lot of work to be done?
No, so the building blocks, so we call them digital building blocks. So there's kind of three aspects which are, they shouldn't be new because we've been talking about them, but obviously from a a consultative perspective. So the building blocks are very much around the technology underpinning, whether that's kind of gov.ie for the online platforms, whether it's e-forms, a payment service, some messaging services. So those 9 or 10 building blocks are there in place, up and running, and there to support other departments from a whole of government approach. So that's the first thing. I mentioned the digital wallet as well is probably the digital public infrastructure in relation to identity. And then you mentioned the life events. So I suppose the key difference is because each government department has a mandate in relation to 2030 and digitizing their schemes and their services. But I suppose the life events brings all that together in a kind of a one online kind of one-stop shop effectively for citizens to avail of all services. And what that does is it masks effectively the complexities of all the departments and all their inner kind of workings. And that's the idea of this, is to make sure that it's citizen focused and it's simple. So there's no complexity in relation to the services available.
So for us, publics, members of the public, if something happens at a big life event of which there's a certain number that we've chosen to concentrate on, it's a simple, uncomplicated stream. But the actual reality of that is really not.
Yes.
So, I mean, you've got process re-engineering, I presume. You've got inter-organizational collaboration, and you've got technology silos. So, what are you thinking the big challenges are going to be?
Well, it depends on. So you framed it quite nicely there in a sense of how you've described some of the aspects to it. So first of all, there is a design piece, and we're working in relation to phase one. Phase one is around kind of the registration of a birth. You mentioned the registration of a bereaved for somebody you love and close to you, further education and training, and social housing. So they're kind of the 4 key events that we're covering as part of phase one. So there's a design piece for each of the departments that we're interacting with as part of this phase and in relation to the events. And then there's the identity piece I mentioned in relation to the wallet and also in relation to the services. And then there's the services themselves. And when we talk about an event, the registration of a birth or a death, that's an overarching event that has multiple services underpinning that. So it's incredibly challenging. And again, it depends on how mature a department in relation to their own, digital infrastructure and whether they're not so mature, because what we're trying to achieve here for that reusability and to make it easier is to use the building blocks, use the digital building blocks.
Don't reinvent the wheel. There's components in here, I'm going to call them that for simplicity, that you can tap into.
Correct. And you're trying to unpick that because at the end of the day, we're delivering a service. It's a whole of government approach to delivering that services. And then the inner workings of all the complexities around the infrastructure that supports those services is certainly one of the challenges.
I suppose one of the things I wasn't completely clear about, is this an opt-in or opt-out strategy, or is it look, if we're going to do this life event, we're going to collaborate, you have to do it, and if it's a have to, is there then funding for an organisation who maybe is falling behind a bit on their technology roadmap to kind of accelerate that, and how does it practically work?
Well, I suppose there are funding available for aspects that will enhance the capability around the building blocks and the services. Every department has their mandate within their own department to deliver these services. But there are incentives to contribute to the building blocks and others. Yes, there is. Yeah.
So if I can't opt out, is that what you're telling me?
No, sorry, that's the department perspective. You asked me in relation to kind of funding, but I suppose from the citizen perspective, like what we're trying to achieve here is making life easier.
Yes.
For citizens, providing the citizens that are, services to citizens that they need in a very easy and simple way. So there's always alternatives, absolutely. But this is the whole of government approach to make it easier for citizens to avail of our services and their services they need. And,
we're going to get in now to a couple more questions around bringing departments together, because I know that cannot be easy. And I know that is probably the reason why one of the many reasons why you probably are in this role. But let's take a really quick break. We've got to have a message from our partner, Accenture.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
So we're back with Louise McKeever, who's the Government CIO, and we were just talking about life events and some of the complexities of actually making that a reality, where it's a seamless experience for us citizens. But in terms of, departments working together. And I know you're really early, so you're not going to be able to tell me, well, we did this or we did that to get everybody to work together. But you have a lot of experience in it. But often you're dealing with different mandates, different systems, different budgets, different priorities. How do you get everybody working together around one journey?
Yeah, and I think, well, the first thing is to say that, I have good relationships across government. I've been knocking around for a long time, and a lot of the government CIOs, across the board have reached out to me already. So, like, those relationships are there. People are very enthused, but like, it's not without its challenges. And I suppose we need to be clear that I don't govern each of the CIOs across the department. They're independent. They have their own autonomy. They have their own budgets. They have their own priorities. But there's an overarching mandate, to deliver, the life events and to deliver a whole of government services. So I suppose that's the challenge, stepping out of, how do you prioritise? How do you ensure that we can deliver? And it's tricky. It's incredibly complicated. But there's appetite and there's enthusiasm, and was also acknowledging that it's challenging. So again, you mentioned it there, early days in my tenure, but the teams have been engaging, this year and last year, and building and, up the capability, and we all have our North Star. We know the direction, but it's working through those challenges.
I suppose it's your role to kind of realise the overall strategic digital strategy for the nation, right?
Yes.
Which is going to be so important for competitiveness and us just speeding on. And not getting left behind. But I think one of the things you mentioned is that you mentioned it in relation to quite a few different departments, is the use of data more intelligently.
Yeah.
So, have you been seeing ways that you already learned that there's clear benefits from using data effectively, and have you got ideas around that for where you are now?
Yeah, and I would have those ideas particularly from the two large departments that I've operated in, and seen the huge benefit of treating data as a national asset. So treating that as a national asset in relation to each department, and now at a national level, I think that's key. And it's facilitated in the context of the life events and the building blocks. And that's one of the huge benefits, and everyone acknowledges that. I suppose we have to be very careful. We have rich data, but we have to be very careful that we're using it responsibly, right? So that's the trust of citizens, to make sure that we're using their data for the right reasons, in the right way, and it's secure, and everything else that goes with that. So I think that's really, really important. But yes, it is a critical enabler for the life events process and delivering a whole of government agenda.
Yeah. I suppose in a way, in an ideal world, we get to the stage where we could predict what's going to happen almost, and we're able to take actions. But of course, getting there, it takes a while. And I suppose it has speeded up, though, because new technologies and AI have enabled us to access those resources and that data more effectively. But you're saying we just have to make sure we've got our guardrails in place?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I mean, that's one of my mandates as well. I suppose it's AI acceleration cross-government. I mean, there are plenty of examples cross-government, and I've mentioned one or two of them, all right, across various different departments, of how they have accelerated the application of AI in very different ways. Now, most departments are using it in the context of productivity, which is straightforward enough, and there's other use cases out there. But like, a key critical success factor of the application of AI is good data. We need to have good curated data.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you start from. People think that if we kind of skip over that, we could do this, we could do that, but it's actually hard to get good, clean data, right? And then actually maximise it. But you're at a time, again, we mentioned earlier on, Ireland's EU presidency. You've been drawn into lots of things like the European CIO network, and you're contributing that in terms of AI and the Digital Summit. But where do you think, or is there a possibility that Ireland can provide real leadership? And in what areas do you think we have a lot to contribute?
Yeah, well, I suppose first of all, there's one that I'm leading on, which is the CIO network. As part of a member of the CIO network from an EU perspective, and obviously under Ireland's presidency, we are hosting that network here at the end of November. That's the scheduled date. So we're working through that agenda at the moment. And it's an opportunity to shine, certainly in relation to data, digital and AI, working through some of the detail of that. And it's quite collaborative as well, because we're looking to get maybe some of the challenges across Europe and get some insights as part of that forum. And it's also an opportunity across government to actually feed into that process as well. So it's certainly an opportunity to lead on some of those big ticket items, yeah.
I suppose that's one of the big benefits of being part of the EU, is that we can collaborate, learn from each other. And it sounds like we're getting a great opportunity this year.
Yeah, so that's one of the events. There's a few others, obviously a Cyber Week as well, which I'm presenting at one of those, and also from a semantic perspective, which is interoperability, which is another key big ticket item around data interoperability across Europe.
Yeah.
And that'll be another event that on a panel discussion or a presentation that I'll be attending.
So look, I know because we've got the EU presidency here, and I know that the world, in terms of geopolitics, is kind of a moving part, if you like, at the moment in the world. But so digital sovereignty has become an issue that really we never even talked about, really, particularly, or certainly not in kind of the public parlance. So what issues are you hearing coming through about digital sovereignty across the EU?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and it is very topical. And I'm going to, I suppose, talk about it in the context of sovereignty, because I know we talk about digital sovereignty, we talk about data sovereignty, but if you look at it in the context of data, digital and AI, so from a data perspective, we need to know where our data is, and we need to have the assurances around who can access it and who should absolutely not access it. So that's really, really important and nothing new. And then from a digital and AI perspective, from Ireland's perspective, we are providing services to citizens, and we need to make sure that we can continue to do that. So it's about resilience and control. We need to understand, we need to have access and control of our digital infrastructure and services. So that's real simplifying it. But I suppose, you mentioned that geopolitical piece, which is that's not theory, that's a real risk. So again, I summarize it in resilience and control, making sure that we have control of our data, our digital and AI services, for continuity, to ensure that we're continuing providing those services for the citizens of Ireland.
And do you see things changing to reflect that in terms of how we're doing things?
Well, I think it's evolving. I was at a conference actually in the UN a couple of weeks ago, and I was asked to talk about it in the context of open source, because we use open source technologies as part of the building blocks, and that's a really good thing to do. But there's a different perspective, from global, but even within the EU. And I think from Ireland's perspective, we have a really good position. We built up really, really good relationships, and we need to make sure that there is a bit of a balance here as well. So it is evolving. And again, it's about the capability, it's about the resilience, it's about the control. And that's my narrative, and that's how I'm moving forward.
Well, I suppose there could be a tension, couldn't there, in a way, between sovereignty and protecting Ireland as an entity within the EU. And then, of course, we have a special role to play as hosting so many tech companies from the States. Yeah. So do you feel there's a tension there, or how do you think that'll roll out?
No, well, I think from our perspective, we value those relationships. And I think we're working through that at the moment, and I don't see that changing in the short term, and I think that's really important. But there are different perspectives across Europe, and different member states are doing different things, but we'll just have to tease through that,
I'm going to invite you back, imagine, in whatever, let's say 2 years' time, and you're going to say to me, this is how we've made it faster, easier, more joined up. What would you hope for? What's your aspiration?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that we've just completed our consultation for the digital wallet. And I suppose just for context, under the eIDAS regulation, from a European perspective, we're required to have that digital wallet up and running by the end of this year. So we finished our consultation. We're just about to embark on a national pilot, and then pushing forward, hopefully by the end of this year, to have that rolled out. So that'd be huge to see what will be the first services on the digital wallet. I mentioned the live events, certainly on our phase 1. I'd like to see some of those live events live over the coming 12 months. And then building on that capability for the future phases of the live events, including AI adoption or acceleration. As I said, there's plenty of use cases. It's already been operationalized across a number of departments. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. And our national data strategy will be launched as well. So there's lots of good things ahead in for 2027. Well, the end of this year and 2027.
Yeah. I've signed up for the digital wallet pilot, so I'm really looking forward to that. And I know that's been hard to get to where it is now, so people probably don't realise how many steps we had to go through, because it's you have a whole lot of new frameworks, not just technology, right, to get people to be able to share that information without compromising any GDPR issues.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we took the time, and the steps that we did take to prove, once in relation to the technology, well tested, but then obviously that consultation piece and getting people's feedback and alleviating any concerns, and we will be publishing that at that consultation and the feedback from the consultation. I think it's important that people see that, and also that'll inform the next kind of enhancements in relation to the wallet and so forth. So I think that's a really critical next step.
Well, good. I'm delighted to hear that there's going to be a CIO forum, and I'm going to definitely be doorstepping you to try and interview some of the CIOs when they're over. But look, thank you so much for joining us in that part 1 and part 2. A fascinating conversation about your career so far, but also lots of good stuff coming down the line. So thanks a million, Louise, for coming out to Transform Gov.
Thanks very much, Maeve. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll have you back. But finally, I want to thank the team here who make it all happen. So Peter Rice, who's our studio manager, our video editor, Neil Horner, and sound engineer, Lee Brennan. And also, sorry, he's not here today. It's actually Richie Ryan, who's our sound engineer and videographer. So thank you to the team. And of course, thank you for listening. And if you want to share this with your friends or your colleagues, please do. But there's lots of other podcasts of Transform Gov on all the platforms you normally use for your podcast. So we look forward to seeing you next time.